Spoken on the topics faith, family and freedom in Cuba, Belgium, Brazil, Congo, UK and all over the USA to crowds from 14 to 40,000. International leadership speaker, trainer and coach. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of Story Power TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders Podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet Television as well as multiple social media channels. Please help me welcome J Loren Norris.
If you've spent any time at all around toddlers, and I get a chance to spend time around those little people quite a lot because we have 10 of them in our family. Not all of them are toddlers at this point, but when you get to spend time around toddlers, you get to hear an infinite question, a question that almost never stops. Now, with the day of digital technology and iPads, sometimes they're distracted beyond belief and they spend their time with their face in a digital device. But the one question that never stops coming is why? Why? Why is it like that? Why did you do it that way? Why didn't you do this? Why can't I have that? Why is the sky blue? Why? It never stops. Unfortunately, for some people, the question why and the curiosity to understand, it diminishes over time. In fact, it seems like for many people, the more time they spend in the educational process, the less curiosity they have to know things they don't already know. They stop asking why. They just take the information they're given and they assume that that's completely true and they act as if what they learned is all they need to know. Dads don't stop there. Dads welcome the question no, or welcome the question why, even if they don't know why, and they try to have a conversation, even if they can't give a full explanation. And that's what I want to talk about today on Leading Leaders.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.
I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. And it has been the evidence in my own life that my insatiable desire to know, I would say, was squelched for a while when I was in middle school, high school age range for a plethora of reasons. But it was in my 20s that I rediscovered the desire to know. And as you can tell by the books behind me from every direction, I still have a great desire to know. I personally read stuff from neuroscience to electronics to, anything I can get my hands on. Mostly to do with the human and the human mind and human relationships, but I still study the sciences. I still do a lot of my own auto repair and the crafting on this mobile studio that we're doing. My boys and I get out there with the skill saw and the drills and the power tools, and we do the manufacturing. I scheme up these strange ideas of what I want it to be able to do next, and I find a way to do it. And if I don't know, I go YouTube research it, or I go grab a book and I dig in. And I believe dads pass that curiosity onto their children for great reward. See, not everybody is cut out to be an academic master. Not everybody wants to spend the 12 years in school that are required to graduate high school in the U.S., but they look beyond that, maybe to the next 4 years to get their bachelor's degree, their typical undergrad degree. Maybe they want to go 8 or 6 and get their graduate degree and their master's. And some of them want to go further and get their postgrad degrees and PhDs or THDs or MDivs or whatever it is, their focused education. But now you're talking about anywhere from 12 to 16 years, sometimes more than that, in an educational process, being taught sometimes in a very specific, very narrow way. Now, the concept of a college or university is to have a well-rounded education. So it's not just learning that one thing, where a trade school may say you're just learning that one thing. It's electronics, it's automotive, it's nursing, it's phlebotomy, whatever that one thing is, you're learning that one thing and you're kind of staying in the track of that one thing. And so you become a one-trick pony, if you will. That's the one thing you know. Well, there's a lot of financial gain to be valued in both sides of that. Whether you have the well-rounded education and a specific track in finance, or a specific track in medicine, or a specific track in the world of automotive care, whether it's race cars or it's the general public. Anytime you've got an advanced education in those things, you've created doors of opportunity for yourself. Of course, you're going to have some debt load to pay back unless you've worked your way through college, but having that education is intended to expand your mind, to expand the scope of what you know and understand, and also to increase your value, not only to yourself, but to society. The unfortunate aspect is the reality that many people get either bored with the educational process and they kind of back out before it's done. They quit college, they drop out after they got the first degree, but it's not really applicable. My wife, as an example, and this is not a slight, just a reality, she spent 3.5 years in school as a single mother, got her degree in psychology, bachelor's degree in psychology, on the dean's list as a single mom in less than 3 years while working a full-time job. That is no small feat. I don't diminish that at all, but we both know now, 28 years of marriage later, that she has a bachelor's degree, a strong bachelor's degree with good grades and good credentials, that as a bachelor's degree alone in that field means very little. It doesn't mean she's not educated. It doesn't mean she's not intelligent. It just means a bachelor's degree alone in that field accomplishes nothing. You can't do anything with it. You have to have at least a master's in order to have a license. So from an education and vocation standpoint, it doesn't apply much. The challenge for a lot of people is they take that 4 years, they spend that $50,000, $70,000, $200,000 depending on the university. They come out with a little more education, a little label behind their name, a nice lambskin to hang on the wall, but they've given up the curiosity. They've given up the desire to know. I know that dads who are deeply invested in their children's lives don't just expect them to follow that educational process, to get that first degree and the advanced degree and then the postgraduate degree, but they also keep them curious about life, asking them questions, not just trying to answer all of them. Sometimes the most powerful answer to a question is a better question. Maybe the question you're asking isn't complete. Maybe the question you're asking in itself reveals a lack of knowledge that I believe you should already have, or a lack of knowledge that if you gain that knowledge first, not only could you answer the question yourself, but you would have a better understanding of so many more things around you. My wife had a tire that was a little out of balance. I drove her car the other day, but it was on a really windy day, and I felt like, well, maybe that swaying is the wind, and we just bought the car a couple of months ago. I didn't want to think that the tires were already bad on it, but my son, both of whom had worked in a tire shop for quite a while, had kind of been through this process with a focus on bad tires. And so when he rode in the car with her for an hour or so to his other apartment and back, she said, "What do you think?" He said, "Well, I think you need to get your tires rotated and balanced." And so she took her car after work. She went into the tire shop. They rotated and balanced her tires, charged her $60 for it. She got back in the car. She's driving 1 block from the store, and she calls me and she says, "It's pulling. There's a vibration in the wheel. It doesn't feel right." I said, "If you have a vibration in the wheel and it's pulling, that's a slipped belt or bad tread. You've got a bad tire. You need to take it back and ask them if they actually inspected those tires when they took them off the car to rotate, balance them, and rotate their position." So she did. She took it back to the shop. She gets into the shop. The manager comes out and says, "What seems to be the problem?" And she said, "Well, I just had my car tires rotated and balanced, and they're worse now than they were before." So the manager went out and looked at them, and sure enough, he found what both my son and I suspected: a slipped belt with separating tread, a bad tire. A dangerously bad tire. The kind of tire that blows out in traffic and throws you into a brick wall or an oncoming car. Kind of bad tire. And they had just moved it from the back of the car to the front of the car. Now, there's a couple of learning moments in that alone, and that is, when the car was feeling funny in the wind, I probably should have got out and got underneath the car and looked at the tires myself. I didn't. That was my fail. But my son, riding in the same car, had the same kind of idea that I did. There may be a problem here that goes beyond the norm. you should have it checked out, and here's how you should have it checked out. But here's the other part of that. We both know, having been in that position of taking the tires off of a car, putting them on the spin balancer, watching it spin around, putting the weights in place, putting it back on the car, that you had to handle that tire from multiple directions. Straight on the side, turned on its profile, rolling on its tread. Unless you picked it up from the car, carried it to the balancer, at some point you watched it roll across the ground. It should have been painfully obvious to whoever took that bad tire off the car and rolled it to the balance wheel that that tire was not worthy of being on the ground of anybody's car. It was an unsafe tire. But somebody who's more interested in getting off work because it's almost closing time and doesn't really care if it's not their car, and they get paid the same whether a good tire goes on or a bad tire goes on because they don't get any commission. They get paid by the hour to balance tires. That lack of passion to know also leads to a dispassionate behavior in your workplace. See, as a leader, we need to understand that if you don't have a desire to know more than you already know, if you don't have a desire to do better than you can already do, to accomplish more in life, if you're not reaching for something beyond where you are, not just as a child, but as a team player, as somebody in your organization, if they're stifled in their desire to know more, and their desire to accomplish more, and their desire to grow to the next thing, if they're stifled in that, either because you don't give them the opportunity to learn or give them the motivation to learn, then they're going to be like the guy who took the tire off the car, rolled it across the ground, saw that it was wobbly, noticed that the tread was coming off of the tire, and still put it back on someone's car to drive away with. Now that's either lazy or malicious. I'm gonna go for lazy rather than demeaning the person's character. I don't even know who it was, but when you think about how malicious you have to be to intentionally put a bad tire on somebody's car, there's something really wrong with the upstairs. Dads know that stoking that curiosity, asking the next question that the child is not asking yet, and I don't care at what age. When my son went to pick up his motorcycle yesterday, he cranked it up and idled in the parking lot. I was wrapping up a phone call. While I was wrapping up the phone call, I walked over to crank the throttle on the bike and see how it sounded to me, and it died. Well, it turns out there was something in the tank that got into the fuel injections or the carburetor system and clogged the whole system up. Now, based on my knowledge of where we were positioned, the amount of time it would have taken to drive out of the shop where it was being repaired and onto the highway and cross a major highway intersection that has no stoplight, where cars are crossing at 70 miles an hour from both directions, on a bike that would have stalled at about that time, would have left him a sitting duck in crossing traffic. The phone call that I took may have literally saved his life because it took about that amount of time, the same amount of time as a phone call as it would have to get to the conversation, for the bike to clog up and die. The first time he accelerated to highway speed would have been the same result, whether it was sitting still or sitting on the highway, and that could have been a deadly combination. We learn. Sometimes we learn in a passive way and we don't realize how tragic that was. I made a point to him to say, aren't you glad we put it through the ringer before we drove off with it, instead of putting you through the ringer of somebody else's front bumper? Sometimes we miss these things, especially in our anxiety and our anxiousness to move on with life. I want to challenge you as dads, as leaders, understand that part of your job is to provoke a desire for knowledge, for wisdom, to cause people to be more curious about the things going on in their life, to look around, to be observant, to become more aware. Part of your job as a dad is to inspire learning, reading things that are totally outside of your realm, not the educational stuff that you have to read, but to desire to read things you don't have to read. I just started, before I started this podcast this morning, I started listening to a podcast between Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is an astrophysicist. He's being interviewed by Joe Rogan. And he kind of gives a poke back to Joe Rogan because when they start the interview, Joe Rogan says, so why don't we have flying cars? Well, that curiosity is way outside the realm of Joe Rogan's expertise. He's a UFC fighting ref or ringside commentator who was for years a stand-up comedian. He still does stand-up comedy, but he's mostly known for his podcast and for his ringside. But to ask a question about astrophysics of an astrophysicist is a great opportunity. How many people will pick up the book, though, Astrophysics for Those in a Hurry? and read that book. I don't know, for 67 weeks, it's been on the top of the New York Times bestseller list. I want to read the book now. I'm not in astrophysics. I don't really care a lot about astrophysics. But if you can take a subject that complicated and make it simple for somebody else, that makes you a great teacher. Dads, that's part of your job. To take a complicated subject and make it something that children, even grown children, become curious about. Make them want to know more. More about politics, more about science, more about relationships, more about education, more about the neighborhood, more about fertilizing your grass and watering your lawn and when should you cut down the trees and prune the roses. All of those are factors of life that are going to be important. Maybe they should learn how to plant a seed and grow a stalk of corn if they didn't learn that in kindergarten. See, all of these are factors of life that Dad has a direct contribution to. And Dad should be inspiring the desire to know those things. Dad should be asking questions so that kids go, I don't know. Well, let's figure it out together. Let's do something greater than just what you're showing up to school for. Even if you're already working on your PhD, I bet I can ask some questions you hadn't pondered yet. That's the role of a dad in the life of a child. You don't have to have all the answers. You're not expected to know everything. You're expected to inspire that desire for knowledge so that they never stop learning. They become lifelong learners. And Dad, they will only be lifelong learners if you're a lifelong learner. Let me point out one little factor, though. If you're a leader at any level, you know this to be true. There is no leader who is not a lifelong learner. And if you become a lifelong learner, it is impossible to not become a leader. You got to have some serious character flaws to want to expect no one to follow you when you have a desire to know and become a lifelong learner. The more you learn, the more people are going to be following your influence. That's just a reality. If you want to lead, learn. And if you want to lead your children well, inspire them to learn. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.